podcast hate nonsense. It's the PoliticsJOE Pubcast, ladies and gentlemen. Shmoo! Yes. It's called fashion. Look it up. Ed Campbell, got you. Gotcha. Ed Campbell, the golden boy of PoliticsJOE, is here as always. Ed, cheers.
Cheers. Hello.
Pleasure to have you with us. And we're joined today by Ant Breach, a senior analyst at the Centre for Cities. Ant,
cheers.
Thank you for joining us. Cheers. Good to have you with us. Let's have a little. Yeah, love that.
Good audio.
That is good audio, actually, isn't it?
ASMR.
We could pivot to that.
Maybe.
I think people would pay you to do that.
Maybe better content.
This is part of our series of episodes where, in lieu of Prime Minister's questions, we speak to people with big old brains, talking about policy issues, how we can make this country better, because we had a bit of a slot in the calendar, and that's why Ant is here. So, Ant, thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, no, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to have you on and to raise the tone, I think, a little bit, Ed. You probably agree.
Not too much.
Yeah, no, too much. We'll keep it.
We'll drag you down.
We'll keep it fairly lowbrow. We'll bring you to our level. So I'll let Ed kick things off maybe then, if you want to start the conversation.
And favourite city?
Favourite city, UK or abroad?
Oh,
both, please.
Yeah.
Oh, so favourite city in the UK, I'd say probably Liverpool, but I'm biased. You can't tell, but I am from Liverpool. I grew up there. Maybe abroad, I'd say probably Tokyo is my favourite. So I think not just good for Japanese stuff, obviously.
Yeah.
But also
maybe one of the best places for Japanese stuff.
I've heard one of the best. But also pretty good, I think, in terms of how a city works, right? You think about how large it is. It's the biggest city on earth, but the transport works great. The housing is really cheap. It's really clean. It's really quiet. So there's loads of things going on there that I think are really useful lessons.
You're actually probably the right person to ask about this. Is it an urban myth that they designed the Tokyo subway system using fungus? You know, I can't remember. They mapped it out, didn't they? They put like nodes on a map, and they got the fungus to realize the most efficient way to travel between the nodes to like eat protein or something.
So I think that story is like, you can get the fungus to recreate the Tokyo map. Right. So it was all built kind of, in bits and bobs over the 20th century. But if you highlight kind of where the people want to go, like where the suburbs, where the job centers, then you put these magical fungus down, it will connect up the city, like the little Petri dish, in exactly the way that the network does. So
it already mirrored it.
So we're at least as intelligent as fungus.
That's
basically.
good to know.
That's good.
Good to know. Do you reckon we're as Ant is definitely as intelligent as fungus. I'm not sure if you and I are as well.
I'd like to think that.
Quite a spongy fungus. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So, Ant, why don't we start by you telling us what the Centre for Cities does?
Sure thing. So we're a non-partisan think tank. We were founded about 17 years ago or so in the mid-noughties. And we were founded because our founder, kind of Lord Sainsbury, had noticed there was a gap in the market for British policy debates about a lot of the new urban economics that was coming out of the United States at that period in time. And while there were other organizations that really focus on architecture or on design or on kind of urban living kind of in a lifestyle sense, we're really focused on cities as local economies, right? So people move to cities to get a job. And the role that cities play as local economies, so the things you experience within a few miles of your house and your workplace, has a big, massive impact on people's life chances and their overall standard of living. So thinking about how cities and local economies contribute to the national economy and how those then urban policy problems play out at the national level is why we exist, basically.
Nice. Okay. We'll talk about that in some detail, but since Ed asked you your favourite city, it's actually been gnawing away at me what your favourite city is.
My favourite city?
Yeah.
In the UK?
Yeah, go on.
Glasgow.
That's your hometown. Both of you said your hometowns.
If you're not from a city.
No.
So I think
a market town.
Yeah. So
is there space for market towns at the Centre for Cities work?
We have done papers on towns.
You fobbed me off there.
So, towns and cities. But it turns out that towns have a really important relationship with their cities.
Okay, nice.
So they're linked together.
You hear that? I'm important too.
I think if someone said, "What's your favourite market town?" you'd say your hometown.
Yeah, I probably would.
Oh, so I don't think it's a
No one's ever asked me what my favourite market town is.
Yeah.
So, to be fair,
I don't have one, to be fair.
Yeah.
What's your favourite city, Ollie?
Belfast.
Oh,
Good one.
Yeah,
that's a good one.
it is.
All good ones.
Yeah, good city.
I always think that those three cities are quite similar. In there, whenever I go to each of them, I think Glasgow reminds me of Belfast and Liverpool. Belfast reminds me of Liverpool and Glasgow.
Are they similar? You are the expert.
I'd say probably economics-wise somewhat, probably underperforming a little bit, but also got that kind of Victorian inheritance, right? There's kind of big, grand, sandstone kind of, imperial buildings, right? But now probably not quite inheriting them as much as they could or should.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I love Belfast. Nice people, good food as well, actually. Great seafood in Belfast.
Yeah, good pubs.
Yeah, 100%. That's the main thing, really. How central are we thinking pubs are to the economy of cities?
I'd say pretty central. Yeah. I'd say like downstream of some of the other stuff. There's sort of the bread and butter of transport, housing policy, jobs. But the difference between a good city and a bad city, you know when you arrive, right? What's the nightlife? What's the atmosphere? What's going on?
What are the vibes like? The vibe check. That's actually not a bad idea. You should put that on some of your future reports into cities, I think. Vibe check.
Credit us.
Yeah. Courtesy of PoliticsJOE.
New co-authors.
Yeah. Okay, so I think maybe it makes sense, particularly for our audience, to talk a little bit about housing.
Sure.
I know you've done work particularly on sort of flexible planning, and maybe we'll get into that. But maybe if you could sort of put the policy explanation on why so many people, whether it's in rented accommodation or whether it's in their first-time buyers or whether they actually own a house and they're now getting shafted by the mortgage market, why does housing feel like such a crisis point in the country? Could you put some meat on the bones of that feeling that a lot of people have right now?
So I think kind of if you zoom out a bit and you think about, all around kind of a developed world, housing is always a massive part of people's budgets, right? People normally should spend about a third of their income on housing, right? And in terms of your lifestyle, your quality of life, obviously makes a huge difference to, when you're at home, but also kind of what jobs you can access, the neighborhoods you're in, has a massive impact on all kinds of things that are downstream from the actual property itself and what you're paying. But where we're actually at in the UK is because the housing crisis and the shortage is so bad, you've got all of these other things kind of that are downstream that are affected by housing also now feels so difficult and so challenging for like millions of people, especially young people, to access in modern Britain. And nowhere is that more acute than in those places with the most opportunity, so places like London, places like Brighton, places like Bristol, where housing is especially expensive, but it now means that those places are now especially difficult for people to get into and live a normal quality of life, right? People aren't asking for much, they're not asking for massive palaces or Bentleys or, penthouse apartments. Some people are.
I'm asking for a palace.
Some people are climbing the ladder, getting the way up there.
I have no problem with the government providing me with that,
yes.
with those things.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you turn your nose up at that, Ed.
I don't know. It's like the Tony Blair, don't mind people getting filthy rich. I don't mind people getting Bentleys.
Yeah.
Mass state-produced Bentleys.
100%.
I imagine the quality of Bentleys would probably reduce quite a lot if there's massive state-produced.
Turn Bentley into Rover. Right?
Yeah.
Look how that went. Okay, is it an oversimplification though to say it's a supply problem?
No. So I think obviously supply and demand both matter. But if you look around the world, right, supply and demand dynamics play out everywhere. We have had over the past 15, 20 years, kind of interest rates have been falling. So houses generally have been getting more expensive. That's obviously now gone to a very sharp reverse over the past 18 months. Houses have become, cheaper, but not, more affordable because interest rates have gone up. But when we look at why the UK has an unusually bad housing situation internationally, it really does seem to be because we have an unusually bad planning system compared to other countries around the world. And that all wraps up together means that we don't build as much as other European countries. The houses we do build are often in the wrong parts of the country. And the houses we do build are often of quite poor quality as well. So thinking about how we solve that supply problem, both the quantity and the quality sides of the supply problem is really fundamental for tackling not just kind of making rents a bit cheaper, but then fixing loads of other problems in modern Britain as well.
Mm-hmm. And so what are those changes? What's wrong with the planning system right now and how does it need to change?
So kind of the key thing is that the planning system in England, which has existed since 1947, is highly discretionary. So what that means is every decision is taken case by case. So if you're a builder, you can follow the local plan, letter by letter, and you can still be denied planning permission by the council. Compared to most other countries around the world, which have rules-based zoning systems, where instead, if you follow the rules, then you can build. And now that might sound like a really subtle difference, But that has massive, massive effects on the behaviour of builders, the kind of the supply of the land market, and importantly also the behaviour of councils in terms of thinking about, if they've got like NIMBY boomers kind of breathing down their neck saying, we don't want houses, we want as few houses as possible, they're going to think, well, actually, can I shave off or even block entirely these new homes that, they'll often no need to be built, but also with one eye on the election as well, they'll be thinking, actually, I need to build as few as possible.
Surely the NIMBY boomers will find a way to stop. Like, if we move to the zonal system, presumably there's going to be some role for public consultation, or we can't just fucking stick houses wherever we want to.
No, sadly.
But soon,
one day, one day, Simba, this will all be suburbs.
The benevolent dictatorship of the Centre for Cities.
You'll enjoy it. It's 4 million homes.
Yeah.
But yeah, like there must be some outlet for them to have that. How does that happen?
It is when they put their heads in front of the wheels of the bulldozers.
So when you look around the world, there are different kinds of zoning system. So a lot of the ones we have in the United States are pretty inflexible. So they actually have, they only allow big detached houses and they don't allow anything else. So if you're thinking about this questions of urban living, how do we allow people to kind of live closer to each other, have the benefits of, nice restaurants, kind of cafes, walkable living, all that stuff. That kind of zoning is quite bad for that. So a lot of it does come down to the rules that are set by national government in terms of what you can and you can't build in a particular zone. But I think, in terms of that kind of consultation, there is absolutely a role in for saying, all right, people of the community, what do you want and what do you not want? Oh, we want to protect Bluebell Wood, but we don't really mind building on, Bogsworth Farm, for instance. So thinking about how we front load that consultation and having that in the creation of a local plan, rather than every time someone wants to build like a shed or a conservatory or whatever, things more complicated than that. That's the kind of, I think, cultural change the country needs, where instead of that kind of case-by-case approach, again, we're thinking about what are the big trade-offs we're making in terms of land development and the housing crisis.
I guess, yeah. So instead of, if in the same way that the planning system is discretionary, you don't give people the opportunity to oppose development on every single basis. You set, because I assume you probably make the argument to people. You say, we need houses in the town. Most people probably go, yeah, we do need houses in the town. They accept that. It's just they go, not near me.
Yes. Yeah.
And if you have that consultation at the beginning and you get the consent for, whether, I don't know, we're going to zone here for residential, and eventually it gets signed off, at that point, there's presumably no room for them to stop it at that point.
So there's two reasons for that. So one is that you get a wider range of voices in the actual consultation, because part of the problem with these NIMBY boomers showing up is it's only them, right? People who are young people, renters, people still living with their parents, people who are homeless. They aren't showing up on a Thursday evening to get yelled at by in a town hall by a lot of people who don't want them living near them. So that's kind of one element. But I think the other element as well is that actually, if you introduce that certainty into the process, you can actually mitigate a lot of the problems that people do have with development, which really often come down to infrastructure. So, when people want or a new development is being proposed, people will often say, I don't really mind it, but I'm really worried about traffic, or what about GP surgeries or school places, etc. Part of the problem is that the planning system is really bad at actually doing planning, right? Ideally, it would be like SimCity or something, or City Skylines, right? Where you've got your map, you put down your zones for residential or commercial, etc., and you realize, oh, the school is now full. We need to build a school alongside that. Because the planning system is actually all about stopping development and trying to build as little as possible, it really, really struggles to line up new infrastructure with new houses, and people understandably get pissed off. And having a system which is more certain would make it much easier for councils to deliver infrastructure alongside those new houses.
I, for one, would quite like it if building cities was like SimCity.
Pretty fun.
I loved that game. Yeah. Presumably you were quite into that.
I was, also quite a lot, Part of the interview.
Show us your biggest build. What are the amenities like? Yeah. Okay, nice. And actually, that's given me, maybe we'll have to edit this out, but that's given me an idea about NIMBYs, because presumably there must be people who do go to these town halls to argue with NIMBY boomers on every occasion.
Yes. Sport.
So we should go.
That's like a blood sport.
That is like blood sport, yeah. I'm into that.
Yeah, you should go to the PoliticsJOE podcast, kind of go along to...
Live?
Yeah.
We could commentate on it like sport.
Yeah.
Unreal.
So what's the most low stakes town hall we could go to? But development for one extension in rural Bedfordshire. Yeah. Is Bedfordshire rural?
Yeah.
Before I said that?
It is.
Okay. Pretty well. Arguably should be more urban. Should be maybe...
to the tune of 4 million houses.
Just in Bedfordshire.
How acute?
City.
That's a good point, though, right? Do we need to densify cities? Do we need more suburbia? Do we need to expand the humble market towns of this country?
Make the market cities.
How do you see that development happening?
Yeah.
Basically,
so we'd say that cities need to grow both up and also out.
Okay.
So when you look again at British cities compared to other European cities, you'll see with your eyeballs as you're wandering around. European cities have much more kind of 5-story, 6-story flats. Within kind of the urban core of a lot of these places. British cities tend not to have that. As you get outside the city centre, even in places like Manchester, Birmingham, Nottingham, you'll suddenly find you're in kind of quite low-rise terraced housing, 1 or 2 stories, pretty close to the city centre. Now, there's a few reasons for that. There's the fact that we got rid of our walls around our cities quite early, so we sprawled quite early with Victorian technology. But a consequence of that is that that's actually quite bad for our transport system, right? Because we prevent people from living nearby public transport infrastructure. So it's difficult for them to get into the city centre, and it forces a reliance on cars because of that, that kind of low-rise sprawl which is created. However, that's also the case with things like the Greenbelt. So we've crunched the numbers on London's Greenbelt, which is 3 times the size of London itself. And we reckon you can build about 1 million houses just in walkable buttons around train stations in the Greenbelt, 45 minutes from central London. So we do need kind of both to grow outwards and upwards. And I think just relying just purely on one of those things, as sometimes politicians are keen to do, you're actually kind of making some choices there which actually undermine some of the prosperity of cities and what makes cities great.
Well, we were talking about this at a different point, but what you're proposing is a very radical redevelopment of the way politicians, the British public, think about housing.
Yeah, a bit.
I kind of think the British public is terminally unimaginative, and there would have to be such a pivot in support for housing. Like what would have to change in like the psyche, etc., for this to be? Would the housing situation have to get to just such an unsustainable point that people are suddenly like, oh no, cities should grow or housing should be built? Like, what are the circumstances in which this changes?
So I think it's a couple of things. I think one is exactly that. I think there needs to be just wider social recognition of just how severe the housing crisis is. I mean, you've mentioned that kind of 4 million figure a few times. I mean, that's really how much we're missing compared to the average European country since 1955. Is about 15% of our housing stock just to get to the European average. So there's a huge deficit, and we need to make that up to kind of tackle some of these inequalities and crush life chances we're really talking about. There's also the pure economic side. So obviously, if we do build those 4 million houses, that means we're creating loads of jobs at the same time, right? That means people's disposable incomes are higher. That means they can spend that on the real economy. So connecting that to not just housing issues, but wider issues as well is important. But I think, while it requires us to kind of make changes about how our cities function, I don't think it necessarily means huge cultural changes, in that what's being proposed isn't complete free-for-all, no rules like Mad Max, property development. It's thinking about if you follow the rules, then you can build, right? So that kind of system where saying, all right, these are the rules. We've decided what those rules are. We've decided this is how they're going to be applied. If you follow them, great. And I think there is something in how this country talks about housing and the lack of trust between councils, residents, and developers, where there's a lot of aggro about how unpredictable and how kind of untrustworthy the process is. If we can rebuild trust into that process by making it more certain, I think there is a bit of an envelope for people to accept more change in their built environment than they currently do.
I guess the point I'd add on to what Ed was asking as well, I can't remember, I should know whose Substack it was that wrote about this, but the Cheems mindset. Oh, yeah, yes. Okay, right. So how do we go from being, I hate you building this conservatory within 200 meters of my house to, yes, 4 million homes all across the Greenbelt? Because it's not just public attitudes, right? It's what role is there for the state in all of this? What role is there for private developers? And how do we actually kind of galvanize that into being an effective house building machine rather than what it is currently? Yeah,
I mean, absolutely. I mean, it's kind of, Cheems is kind of like little pathetic little dog who comes up with these excuses for why, things shouldn't happen. I think that does characterize some aspects of how, the British state really thinks about its role and thinks about, cities and the built environment in particular. Not all of it. There are councils and places and people who are kind of really pushing for for big changes and big improvements. But I think where it comes down to, baking that in across the entire country is really thinking about some of the other stuff which we're working on in terms of local government reform, in terms of how do you give councils both, the resources and also the initiative to want to change their places. Because if we're honest, like most councils don't have a great reputation among the public at large. I'm broadly seen as, could be more effectual and could be more responsive. A lot of it comes down to responsibilities Parliament has had in terms of the funding and the system of funding that's been created for councils, the geography and the maps and the responsibilities that councils have. Thinking about how do we let places enjoy true local self-government and have the autonomy to really push through these changes in a way that they're really rewarded for doing so. That's kind of the missing piece of the puzzle, I think, in terms of changing that state behavior and changing politicians' behavior to want to drive change rather than to want to stop as much as possible.
That's a lovely primer on housing, and you guys have done some good reports on this, so I'd encourage listeners to go and actually read them, because there's a lot of detail out there that you can't fit into a conversation like this, mainly because Ant wrote them as well, I think is probably the reason to plug them there. And something else that we were actually always going to talk about this, right? And ULEZ, and is it a good policy? How radical is Sadiq Khan? Yada, yada, yada. But then sort of over the weekend, we had Rishi Sunak coming out in defence of the humble British motorist.
Coming out swinging.
Yeah, coming out swinging for those fucking pedestrians.
When you get on the 25, breezing your hair.
Let's talk. So let's talk a little bit about that, I guess. Maybe I'll just sort of open it up to you for an opportunity to talk about ULEZ, to talk about what that's done to London and whether or not there is really a anti-car. Is that how he described it? Anti-motorist? Anti-motorist policies, in Britain.
Yeah, sure. So I think, air pollution is one of those things, right, where, there are some topics which, you look at and it's a bit of a mixed kind of evidence by, maybe some things are good, maybe it's not quite as bad as you think. Air pollution is not one of those things, right? Like everything that comes out is like, oh my God, like air pollution is bad, right?
Yeah.
Regardless of kind of, whether, you are kind of, salad munching hippie or like kind of proper like, petrol head, you should care about air pollution and want air pollution to be lower. And air pollution is particularly a problem in cities, right? Because you've got all these different sources of emissions, not just cars, but also things like wood burners as well, that, they get in the sky, they fly around, people breathe them in, people get sick. So thinking about like how we reduce air pollution is an important kind of urban policy problem. I think in terms of, sort of this kind of claim of the war on the motorist, I think, again, if we take a step back and we think about, over the past, decade and a bit, train fares have gone up, bus tickets have gone up, all kinds of public transport's become less accessible and more expensive. Fuel duty has not increased in price at all, like over that period. And so relatively, motoring has just factually become cheaper relative to other forms of transport. Now, maybe it should, maybe it shouldn't, but still that fact of air pollution being bad, driving has got much cheaper, means you've created these congestion problems within London, which are now much worse than they were 10 years ago. So I think there's always going to have to be this response from government in terms of how do we mitigate the impact of too much driving or too much pollution within London. Again, maybe ULEZ isn't quite the right way to do it. Maybe it's, we're supportive of it, but, we think it's a good policy and a good idea. But some of the responses come out in kind of recent weeks about how it's like not a problem at all, how there's no, actually breathing in fumes and smog is fine.
I actually love nitrogen dioxide.
Yeah.
It tastes delicious.
Just huffing it, right?
Yeah. In between takes of this, I've got a bag down here.
Tackling that is important, and we should all be thinking about how we try and do it.
Yeah, it's difficult because you feel like, I think it is the case, particularly what we were just talking about earlier with urban planning. It's designed for car journeys, right? Mm-hmm. Whether it's the supermarket in the suburbs, whether it's the out of town shopping centre, and that also raises accessibility questions for people who can't drive, for people who are too old to drive, etc. I really struggle with the idea that the British state or British society is oriented like it's a war on the motorist. I don't think that's the case at all.
I mean, you kind of have this paradoxical position where people are sort of claiming that, there's war on the motorist and like they're winning, right, somehow. But also that everyone in Britain drives, right?
Yeah.
And it's like one of those two things can be true, right? Either sort of the motorists are being crushed underfoot, or there are or everyone drives, right? And I think particularly within the suburbs of big cities, right? Driving is always going to be an important, if not the most important form of transport within urban areas. But thinking again, sort of how can you shift, the 5-10% people who are kind of wavering between driving and cycling or driving and getting a bus or a train if it's convenient for them. That's an important urban policy question, not just from the air pollution side, but also in terms of climate, or almost in terms of, getting quickly and cheaply to, city centre jobs where, wages are higher. There's a whole bunch of benefits that come with that.
Yeah, I think there's definitely benefits to, some things are always going to be easier driving wise. I don't know. You're going to go and do the big bi-weekly food shop, right?
Totally.
You'd much rather put that in the back of a car than carry it in a backpack. As someone who's done that through Central London before, it sucks. But equally, as there are things that are better for driving, there are things that aren't. And I think about, Europe's busiest shopping street, Oxford Street. Why is that not pedestrianised? I think about low traffic neighbourhoods and a lot of the research that shows that actually the traffic doesn't get displaced to either side of it. The traffic actually kind of evaporates. And if that works in tandem with good public transport, segregated cycle lanes, all of these things, it's not about stopping people from driving. It's about making the easiest and best way to make the journey being on a bike, walking, public transport.
And the spatial element really matters as well, right? So it should be local government deciding these things case by case for different places and working out what's right for them, right? So Rishi Sunak's seat in rural, affluent North Yorkshire, cars are always going to be the dominant mode there, and that's totally fine, right? But within central London, right, within kind of zone 2, London, bits of kind of inner Manchester or Birmingham, that's quite different, right? And actually shifting towards, away from cars and towards its other uses, totally possible and has all of these benefits as well. So, again, this is why kind of thinking about how do we empower local government, how do we have the right responsibility sitting at the right level, really important for, not just improving state capacity and improving the initiative of government, but also, just getting better local outcomes as well, which we all want.
One of my favourite sort of bits of public policy making is in Ljubljana. The mayor basically announced that he wanted to pedestrianise basically the entire city centre. And when he announced that he wanted to do this, it was enormously unpopular. He was like, he would get assaulted in the street. It was that unpopular. Continued with it anyway, followed it through, and now, nearly 20 years later, it has something like 90% public approval because it's actually quite nice.
Quite pleasant to walk through.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it's a cliche, but, most of the things people hate about cities are things they hate about cars, right? Loads of cars jammed into kind of a grey, kind of concrete environment. It's really noisy, it's really smelly, it's really dangerous, you can't get anywhere. It sucks, right? But exactly that same environment, with a lick of paint and pedestrianised and made kind of more of a human space, maybe it doesn't necessarily have kind of the economic benefits, that we really care about centre for cities, but certainly in terms of kind of all those health benefits and lifestyle benefits,
life quality.
Those are, all really evident.
We also kind of had it, right, in COVID. Do you remember?
You walked through central London.
Soho was like pedestrianised and they had al fresco dining.
Yes.
It was
buzzing.
Yeah, it was. It looked pretty nice. And
really
then
nice.
I'm going to assume it was probably Westminster City Council took that away from us.
Took it away. Yeah, the government took it away.
Nice. Love that. Great work.
Gotta rein everyone back in.
Yeah.
Fun's over.
Yeah.
Get back indoors.
Enjoying yourself.
Of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Come on, SUVs, come on.
Get back to your fucking desk. Just thinking about ULEZ finally, Ant. This is probably the last question from me. Is what Sadiq Khan's trying to do quite radical? Is it out there? Is by pushing ULEZ to the outer boroughs of London, by sort of waging this war on air pollution, where does he sit within sort of the field of people who are trying to do something about air pollution globally?
So internationally, it's quite bold. There's not many places that are, congestion charging in general, where you're putting prices on, people as you try and make journeys is quite uncommon generally. Doing it particularly on polluting vehicles is especially kind of uncommon. And when it has been done, it's often been to quite small areas, such as the current ULEZ boundary. Having it cover an entire jurisdiction, I don't think there's many, if any, places which are kind of at that level. So, I think, Sadiq is kind of often kind of, criticised many things, but I think on this particular kind of issue, it has been quite a bold step that the mayor is taking.
Pretty radical. Pretty radical. Anything else you'd like to ask, Ed?
I feel like I should know that you've asked.
You don't have to.
Least favourite city?
Oh!
No, I can't answer that. No, I love all my cities equally. Yeah.
This is the politician's answer. We can't make him choose. What's your least favourite city? Edinburgh, presumably, if your favourite is Glasgow.
I went to Edinburgh for
I know you did.
years.
That's why I'm asking.
Aberdeen. It's true. It's horrible.
Okay. This is for the sake of your inbox.
You've agreed with me.
Yeah, fine. Yeah, I've agreed with you in the past. And last time we spoke about it on this very podcast, we cut it out of the fucking episode. So maybe that won't be there. Ant, it's been lovely to have you in.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us. Really interesting conversation. Centre for Cities. Check out their stuff if you want to know more about urban economies and how we can make things better in this country. And thank you, Ed. Thank you as well.
Thank you, Ollie. Thank you for hosting another great episode of the podcast.
That's me. That's me. It's nice to get some gratitude and appreciation for once. Yeah.
Drop a thanks in the comments for Ollie.
Brilliant. Also, we discuss each and every one of the episodes, both myself, Ed, and Ava, on our subreddit. So check it out, r/PoliticsJOE. We'll be there once this episode goes live. So see you there, guys. Until then, on the next one. Bye-bye.